I've started a new channel called Lunila Tales. Please subscribe and watch my best stories there. Link is in the description. The world ended with a punchline. That was the only way Captain Rian Cross could explain it later. One moment, people were eating breakfast, cursing traffic, scrolling through pointless memes. The next, a cosmic disco of colors split the skies like someone had spiked the Milky Way's drink. Children pointed and laughed, parents recorded it for social media clout, and then, in less time than it takes to say "I told you so," every single child under the age of 15 vanished into beams of light. They didn't scream. They didn't run. They just flickered out like a bad signal on an old TV. 1 second they were there, the next the world had no children and no clue what had just happened. Rian had been peeling an orange when it happened. He hated oranges, hated mornings, and hated being retired, but his niece Maya had insisted he try eating healthy because you can't live on coffee and spite forever, Uncle Rian. He had grinned, about to argue, when she blinked out mid-sentence. Gone. Just gone. The orange rolled across the floor, but he didn't remember dropping it. He remembered the smell though, citrus mixing with panic, as the entire world screamed into the same empty sky. The aliens made contact an hour later. Not with governments, not with scientists, but through every TV, radio, and smart fridge on Earth. A voice that sounded like someone gargling gravel announced the children were safe, that they would be returned when the trials were complete. Trials. That word landed like a hammer. Then came the coordinates, broadcast in symbols no one recognized. Scientists argued over what it meant until someone realized they were spatial points, a breadcrumb trail leading deep into the unknown. That was the moment Rian stopped listening to presidents promising diplomacy and experts promising answers. None of them had Maya. He had spent a career as a soldier in the interplanetary wars, had seen what aliens did to prisoners of war, and he didn't trust a single word from any of them. His gut told him this wasn't a rescue mission waiting to happen. It was a hunt, and someone had just volunteered humanity as the prey. By midnight, Rian had packed what little he owned into a single duffel bag. His military ID was still good on the black market networks, and through them he found Zara. Zara was a smuggler with a sense of humor as sharp as the knives she hid in her boot. She laughed when Rian told her where he wanted to go, laughed harder when he said he wanted to follow alien mercenaries into deep space, then named a price so obscene it made him blink. He paid without flinching. She studied him for a long moment after that, like she was deciding whether he was brave or just stupid, then shrugged and agreed. Her ship was called the Starblade, though it looked less like a blade and more like a junkyard welded together by someone drunk on hope. Its onboard AI introduced itself as Clank, a name it had chosen after losing half its original programming in a reactor accident. It spoke with the cheerful optimism of someone who had no idea how close it was to death at any given moment. Rian distrusted it immediately. Their first stop was the coordinates from the transmission, a point hanging like a speck of dust between Mars and Jupiter. Nothing there. No ships, no stations, just cold vacuum. Rian thought they had been tricked until Zara's sensors picked up something faint, like an afterimage in space itself. Clank analyzed it and displayed a holographic echo of a ship jumping to faster-than-light speed. Someone wanted them to follow. Zara didn't like it. Rian didn't either. But the thought of Maya somewhere out there kept him silent as the Starblade powered its engines for the jump. When faster-than-light travel engages, most people describe it as being stretched through the eye of a needle made of nightmares. Rian barely noticed. He had lived through orbital bombardments, through ambushes on alien moons, through peace treaties that lasted less time than a hangover. But this was different. He wasn't going to war for a government or a cause. He was going because Maya had smiled that morning, and now she was gone, and that was enough reason to burn the galaxy down if he had to. On the other side of the jump, the stars were different. Alien constellations glittered like knives thrown across black velvet. Zara whistled low. Clank made a noise suspiciously like a gulp. Something enormous loomed ahead, a space station shaped like a spider's web spun between asteroids. Ships swarmed it, some bristling with weapons, others painted in colors that screamed danger. This was no ordinary trade hub. This was where Law went to die. Zara explained it in the calm voice of someone ordering lunch. This was Blackfall Station, a place where mercenaries, smugglers, and warlords came to drink, deal, and disappear. If the aliens who took Earth's children had passed through here, someone would know. Of course, getting them to talk might involve bribes, threats, or casual violence. Zara smiled when she said that, like she was hoping for the last option. They docked without incident, though Clank kept muttering statistics about mortality rates on Blackfall that were impressively unhelpful. Inside, the air smelled of oil, smoke, and things Rian didn't want to identify. Aliens of every shape filled the corridors, some with too many eyes, others with none at all. Weapons hung casually from shoulders and hips. This was a place where the wrong word could get you killed, and the right one could make you rich. Rian felt eyes on them as they walked. Zara led the way toward a cantina glowing with red light and bad intentions. He followed, silent, scanning faces, hands, exits. The soldier in him never really retired. And that was when he saw it. On the far wall, flickering on a battered holoscreen, was an image of one of the alien ships that had taken the children. Beneath it, scrawled in a dozen languages, were the words, "Cargo for sale. Highest bidder wins." Rian's hand clenched. For the first time since Maya vanished, he smiled. It was not a nice smile. The cantina at Blackfall Station looked like someone had taken a spaceport, a junkyard, and a bad idea, and shaken them together until they formed a business. Dim lights buzzed overhead, struggling to compete with the glow of alien signs advertising drinks with names like Plasma Sunrise and Quantum Hangover. Every table was full of mercenaries, smugglers, and bounty hunters swapping lies for credit. A band in the corner was playing something that sounded like a blender full of bees, but the audience seemed to like it. Rian, Zara, and Clank stood at the entrance like the setup to a very bad joke. They drew attention instantly. Rian because he looked like trouble wrapped in muscle and military scars, Zara because she moved with the kind of swagger that made people check for their wallets, and Clank because he was a half-rusted war AI with one glowing eye and a personality upgrade gone wrong. Someone at the bar snorted when Clank tried to order a drink in binary, then quickly stopped laughing when the AI politely offered to demonstrate its flamethrower attachment. Zara led them to a table in the back, the kind where deals were made and people sometimes disappeared. She slipped a small device onto the table that fuzzed their conversation into static for anyone listening. "This is where we find answers," she said calmly, scanning the room. "Mercenaries talk when they are drunk or scared. We can arrange either." Rian leaned back, watching the crowd. He had spent years learning how to read people, and this place was full of the kind who looked at strangers like new opportunities for betrayal. He caught snippets of conversation about cargo runs, weapons sales, and something called the Crimson Syndicate, a name that made a few people glance nervously over their shoulders. Clank returned from the bar carrying a tray of drinks it had obtained either through charm or thinly veiled threats. It set one in front of Rian, who ignored it, then carefully sipped from its own drink through a straw despite lacking anything resembling a mouth. Rian decided not to ask how that worked. A group of heavily armed aliens entered, their armor painted with jagged red stripes. The cantina quieted for a moment as they passed. Zara leaned in close and murmured, "Those are syndicate merc. If anyone knows where the kids are, they do. Problem is they shoot first and sell information later." Rian's expression didn't change. "Good. I hate negotiations anyway." They watched the mercs take a table near the bar. One of them, a reptilian creature with too many teeth and a grin that looked surgically attached, slammed down a holographic projector. It flickered to life, showing images of stasis pods filled with human children. "Bids start at 50,000 credits," it announced in a voice like broken glass. The cantina erupted in noise as potential buyers shouted numbers. Rian felt his jaw tighten when he spotted Maya among the holographic images. Zara swore softly under her breath. Clank cheerfully suggested mass homicide as a solution. Not yet, Rian said quietly. We need information first. Zara smirked. Fine, but if this turns into a firefight, I am charging double. They approached the Merc's table. Conversations around them died down as the room sensed incoming violence the way animals sense storms. Rian stopped in front of the reptilian leader and said, I want to buy information, not cargo. The leader looked him over slowly, clearly unimpressed. Information costs extra. Rian tossed a small case onto the table. It opened to reveal enough credits to buy a small moon. The Merc's grin widened. The Crimson Syndicate took the cargo to Starforge Prime, he said finally. Private auction, high security. No one gets in without dying first. Rian nodded once, then punched him so hard the Merc flipped over the table and crashed into his friends. The cantina exploded into chaos. Chairs flew, bottles shattered, weapons fired. Zara dove behind the bar, returning shots with lethal precision. Clank roared something about statistical victory margins before launching a missile into the ceiling for emphasis. Rian moved through the fight like a storm, each punch and shot efficient and brutal. One Merc tried to grab the holographic projector, but Rian smashed his head into it first. Another swung a blade at him, only to be kicked through a window into the toxic air outside. The reptilian leader scrambled for his weapon, but Rian pinned him to the wall with a broken chair. Where on Starforge Prime, Rian demanded. The leader spat blood and laughed. You will never survive it. The Syndicate kills everyone who tries to breach the citadel. Rian's fist convinced him to be more specific. Sector 9 defense grid access codes hidden in the mines. That is all I know, I swear. Rian believed him mostly because the Merc passed out after saying it. The rest of the Mercs scattered once it became clear the fight was over and Rian's crew was still standing. Zara retrieved the access codes from the Merc's wrist console, while Clank helpfully set fire to what remained of the cantina as a distraction. They left Blackfall Station in chaos, alarms blaring, fires spreading behind them as the Starblade launched into space. Zara dropped into the pilot's seat, scowling. Starforge Prime is suicide. You know that, right? Rian checked his rifle. Then it is a good thing I am not planning to live forever. Clank announced cheerfully that it had downloaded 312 new curse words from the station's databases. Rian ignored it, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there Maya was waiting, and the Crimson Syndicate was about to learn what happened when you stole the wrong child. As the Starblade jumped to faster than light speed, Rian allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The hunt was only beginning. The jump to Starforge Prime was rougher than usual, as if the universe itself was trying to warn them to turn back. Zara cursed under her breath while the Starblade's hull groaned like an old man with bad knees. Clank offered a running commentary about the odds of catastrophic failure that no one asked for. Rian stood in the center of the ship, calm and silent, the eye of the storm. He had been on suicide missions before, and they all started like this, with bad weather and worse company. When they finally tore through the fabric of space, the view ahead made even Zara stop smirking for once. Starforge Prime hung like a jagged black pearl in orbit around a dying sun. Lightning storms crackled through its thick atmosphere, casting brief flashes of red across the fortress visible on the surface. Orbiting the planet were dozens of warships bristling with weapons. The Crimson Citadel itself rose from the center of the main continent like a spear aimed at the sky, surrounded by smaller towers and energy barriers that glowed faintly blue. That place does not look friendly, Zara muttered, adjusting their flight path to stay out of the main sensor grid. Good, Rian said. Neither are we. They made their way toward the asteroid belt circling the planet. According to the Merc's data, the mines hidden in the belt held the access codes for the defense grid. Without those codes, any attempt to land on Starforge would end with them scattered across space like confetti. The mines were abandoned decades ago after the Crimson Syndicate stripped them of every valuable mineral. What remained were hollow tunnels twisting through the rock like the veins of some giant corpse. The Starblade slipped inside the largest asteroid, its engines echoing through the empty corridors. Zara scanned for life signs, finding only faint energy readings deep within the rock. Probably defense drones, she said, checking her blasters. Probably, Rian agreed, loading his rifle. It turned out probably was an understatement. The drones attacked the moment they stepped out of the ship, spindly metal bodies dropping from the ceiling like mechanical spiders. Their eyes glowed red and their weapons charged with a rising whine. Rian rolled behind a boulder as the first shots lit up the tunnel. Zara fired back, cursing inventively in 3 languages. Clank strode forward, cheerfully announcing its intention to demonstrate superior combat programming before ripping a drone in half with its metal claws. The fight was fast and brutal. Drones swarmed from every direction, forcing them deeper into the tunnels. Rian moved like a man who had spent his life killing things that wanted to kill him first. Each shot found its mark, each movement efficient and cold. Zara fought like someone who enjoyed the chaos, grinning as she ducked behind cover to toss grenades. Clank sang what sounded suspiciously like an old Earth drinking song while smashing drones into scrap. When the last one fell smoking and twitching on the tunnel floor, the silence returned, heavy and absolute. "Remind me never to vacation here," Zara said, kicking a broken drone aside. They found the control center deep inside the asteroid, a room filled with dust and flickering consoles. Rian stepped over old skeletons still in syndicate uniforms, probably left behind when the mines were abandoned. He powered up the main terminal, watching alien symbols scroll across the screen until Clank translated them into something readable. "Defense grid access codes retrieved," the AI announced. "Probability of immediate counterattack extremely high." It was right. More drones poured into the tunnels, this wave heavier armed and faster. Rian downloaded the codes onto a datapad while Zara covered the door. Clank overloaded the console's reactor as they retreated, setting the whole mine to blow. They sprinted through the tunnels with drones close behind, the sound of charging weapons echoing off the walls. They reached the Starblade as the first explosions shook the asteroid. Zara launched them into space, weaving between chunks of rock as the entire mine collapsed in fire behind them. Drones followed briefly, then vanished as the asteroid's debris tore them apart. Sector 9 access codes active, Clank reported once they cleared the belt. "Defense grid will not recognize us as hostile for approximately 6 hours. "Plenty of time," Rian said, checking his rifle again. Starforge Prime grew larger on the view screen as they approached. The access codes slipped them through the planetary defenses without a single shot fired, though Rian suspected someone somewhere was watching. People like the Crimson Syndicate did not survive long by being careless. They landed the Starblade in a canyon near the Crimson Citadel, hiding the ship beneath rock overhangs. The air outside was thick and metallic, tasting of ozone and ash. Lightning flickered across the blood-red sky, illuminating the fortress in the distance. Zara studied it through binoculars. Main gates looked like they could stop a tank battalion. Heavily armed guards every 50 feet. Anti-air turrets on the walls. Rian slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Then we will not use the gate." They moved across the barren ground toward the fortress, using shadows and dead terrain for cover. Patrols passed close enough for Rian to hear the hum of their weapons, but none spotted them. He felt the old soldier instincts coming alive again, the ones that measured distance and timing automatically. Near the outer wall they found a drainage tunnel half buried in debris. Zara made a face as they crawled through knee-deep sludge, emerging inside the citadel's lower levels. The place smelled of oil and fear. They disguised themselves as arms dealers, using gear taken from dead patrols, and moved through the corridors toward the auction hall. Guards barely glanced at them, too focused on the event ahead. When they entered the hall, Rian stopped cold. Hundreds of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a child frozen in suspended animation. Buyers from across the galaxy filled the room, placing bids displayed on hovering screens. At the center, a masked figure in crimson armor presided over it all, radiating authority and menace. "Karn Vox," Zara whispered. "Warlord of the Crimson Syndicate." Rian's eyes locked on one pod halfway across the room. Maya. Alive. Unharmed. Then Karnvox turned his head, as if sensing Rian's gaze, and spoke one word into his calm. Alarm. Every door in the hall slammed shut at once. Sirens screamed through the crimson citadel as red lights strobed across the walls, turning everything into a nightmare of shadows and chaos. The crowd of alien bidders erupted into panic, some drawing weapons, while others shoved each other aside to reach the exits now sealed shut. Karnvox stood unmoving at the center, his crimson armor reflecting the flashing lights like a living statue of war. His helmet turned toward Rian, and even across the distance Rian felt the weight of that gaze, like he had just been marked by something ancient and merciless. Zara swore under her breath, grabbing Rian's arm. We have to move now before this whole place locks down. Rian tore his eyes from Maya's pod, forcing himself to think like a soldier instead of an uncle desperate to reach his family. Dozens of guards poured into the auction hall, weapons raised while drones descended from the ceiling, unfolding razor-sharp wings. Clank muttered something about unfavorable odds before cheerfully suggesting they level the building. They fought their way through the hall, moving from cover to cover as plasma fire turned the air into a blinding storm. Zara shot with cold precision, dropping guards before they could flank them, while Rian moved with brutal efficiency, every shot aimed to kill, not slow down. Clank waded through the fight like an iron monster, its heavy frame shrugging off small arms fire as it hurled drones into walls. But there were too many enemies, and the room was sealing itself in layers of blast doors, cutting off escape routes one by one. Rian spotted a side corridor marked for maintenance crews and signaled the others. They fought their way toward it, with Zara tossing explosives behind them to slow pursuit. The last thing Rian saw before the door closed was Karnvox stepping down from the auction platform, drawing a blade taller than most men. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark, lit only by the pulsing red of the emergency lights. They ran through twisting passages while alarms howled overhead. Somewhere deep in the citadel, machinery roared to life, as if the entire planet was waking up angry. They finally stopped in a storage room where Zara sealed the door with a cutting torch. Everyone was breathing hard, except Clank, who announced calmly that based on current pursuit speed, they had approximately 12 minutes before being surrounded again. Rian paced the room, glancing at the single stasis pod they had managed to drag with them during the chaos. The child inside floated in frozen sleep, a boy, maybe 10 years old, his face peaceful despite the insanity around him. Zara checked the pod's power supply, muttering that it had at least a week of life support left if they could not open it safely before then. Rian crouched beside it, staring at the kid, as if the boy might wake up and explain everything. He looked ordinary, too ordinary for all this madness. But when Clank finally hacked the pod's control panel and released the stasis field, the boy opened his eyes and spoke in a voice far too calm for someone who had just been kidnapped by aliens and rescued by strangers dripping with blood and sweat. "You should not have come here," he said, looking straight at Rian. Rian blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean, kid?" The boy sat up slowly, his movements deliberate, like someone much older. "They call me Eli. We were taken for the Ascension trials. The Syndicate does not just want soldiers. They want successors. Weapons who can think, feel, lead. Not just kill." Zara frowned. "That sounds like they are building an army." Eli shook his head. "Not building. Transforming. The trials change you. Some do not survive. Those who do are no longer human." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rian felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen experiments during the interplanetary wars, governments turning soldiers into things better suited for killing than living. Most ended in disaster. "Can they be reversed?" Rian asked carefully. Eli looked at him with eyes too old for his face. "Some changes are not meant to be undone." Before anyone could answer, a deafening boom shook the walls. The room's single door glowed red as cutting torches on the other side began slicing through metal. The Syndicate was coming. Zara cursed, grabbing her rifle. "We need a way out now." Clank accessed the Citadel's schematics from a stolen terminal, projecting a flickering map into the air. "Maintenance tunnels here," it said, pointing to a section beneath the fortress. They lead to landing platforms on the far side. Perfect, Rian said, grabbing the datapad with the access code. We reach the platform, steal a ship, and get off this rock before Vox brings the whole army down on us. They moved quickly through service corridors guided by Clank's map, while behind them Syndicate troops spread through the citadel hunting them like rats. Twice they had to fight their way past patrols, the narrow tunnels turning every skirmish into a brutal close-quarters brawl. At one point Zara slipped while crossing a maintenance bridge, hanging by one hand above a shaft dropping into darkness. Rian caught her wrist, hauling her up as plasma bolts sizzled past his head. She grinned breathlessly and said, "Remind me to charge you triple for this job." They reached the landing platforms just as the first wave of troops arrived behind them. The platforms overlooked the citadel's outer walls, the storm outside painting everything in lightning and rain. Rows of Syndicate gunships waited unattended, their crews probably busy searching the fortress interior. Rian signaled Zara to prep the nearest gunship, while he and Clank held off the approaching soldiers. Plasma fire lit the rain like falling stars as Syndicate troops advanced in waves. Rian fought with grim focus, counting shots, timing reloads, while Clank laughed mechanically every time it crushed another drone underfoot. Zara got the gunship's engines roaring to life, yelling for everyone to get aboard. Eli climbed in first, still eerily calm for a kid surrounded by death and fire. Rian backed toward the ramp, firing until the last possible second before diving inside as Zara yanked the controls. The gunship lifted off under heavy fire engines screaming against the storm. Zara swung it around toward the canyon where the Starblade was hidden. Below them the citadel blazed with alarms and searchlights, while Karn Vox himself stepped onto the platform, watching them leave with the stillness of a predator not yet finished with the hunt. As they vanished into the storm, Rian looked at Eli, who sat silently staring out the window. The boy finally spoke without turning his head. "Starforge Prime is only the beginning. They will come for more than just us next time." Rian felt the weight of those words heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. The storm over Starforge Prime raged like the planet itself wanted everyone dead. The stolen gunship bucked in the winds as Zara wrestled with the controls, cursing creatively, while Rian watched the scanners for pursuit. Karn Vox was not the type to let prey escape twice. Sure enough, within minutes Syndicate gunships launched from the citadel, chasing them through the storm like wolves after bleeding prey. Plasma bolts tore through the rain, glowing lines of death that lit the clouds around them. Zara flew like someone who enjoyed terrifying passengers, scraping the gunship along canyon walls to break line of sight, while Rian returned fire from the side hatch. He clipped one pursuer, sending it spiraling into the rocks below, but 3 more took its place. Clank announced the probability of survival was decreasing rapidly, while cheerfully suggesting they might want to start praying to any local deities. They reached the canyon where the Starblade was hidden, landing hard enough to nearly snap the landing struts. Everyone sprinted aboard while Zara dumped the stolen gunship's power core over the side, watching it explode in a fireball that briefly lit the storm brighter than lightning. By the time the Syndicate ships arrived, the Starblade was already clawing its way skyward, engines howling as Zara pushed them into orbit. But the Syndicate was ready. More warships ringed the planet now, their weapons locking onto the escaping freighter. Rian realized grimly that the entire Crimson Fleet was converging on them. They needed allies fast, and unfortunately the only ones nearby were the rebel factions scattered across the neighboring systems. Rian opened a channel broadcasting on rebel frequencies. "This is Captain Rian Cross. The Syndicate is moving something off Starforge Prime you will want to stop. Coordinates attached." The reply came from a gravel-voiced alien who sounded like he had been born angry. "You expect us to fight the Syndicate for free, soldier? Fight for whatever reason you want," Rian said flatly. "Revenge, money, bloodlust, I do not care. Just get here before they turn this planet into glass." The rebels came. They arrived in mismatched ships covered in scavenged armor plates, bristling with weapons that looked older than some civilizations. The Syndicate fleet turned to meet them, and the sky above Starforge Prime exploded into war. Rian had fought battles before, but nothing like this. Dozens of ships on each side tore into each other with missiles and plasma beams lighting the darkness. Cruisers cracked apart under concentrated fire, scattering burning wreckage across the upper atmosphere. Rebel fighters swarmed Syndicate frigates like hornets, diving through flak to launch torpedoes at close range. The Syndicate responded with cold precision, their larger ships methodically cutting down Rebel craft even as more arrived to join the chaos. In the middle of it all, the Starblade weaved through the carnage, heading straight for the planet's surface again. Zara cursed when she realized where Rian was pointing them. "You want to land back at the Citadel, are you out of your mind?" "They will not expect it twice," Rian said, checking his rifle. "We finish this now." Clank muttered something about heroism being mathematically identical to stupidity, but armed the ship's cannons anyway. They punched through the chaos toward the Citadel, landing on a secondary platform already half ruined from earlier fighting. Rebel dropships followed, pouring troops into the fortress, while Syndicate defenders scrambled to respond. The battle spread through the Citadel's corridors, turning hallways into charnel houses of smoke and fire. Rian led the charge toward the central tower where Karn Vox controlled the planetary defenses. If they killed him or took the tower, the Syndicate fleet would lose coordination long enough for the rebels to win. At least that was the theory. They fought room by room up the tower stairs against Syndicate elites in crimson armor. Zara moved like lightning, her blasters never missing, while Rian smashed through barricades with soldiers' precision. Clank simply walked through gunfire like it was rain, hurling enemies aside with mechanical strength that made even the rebels stare. Halfway up the tower, an explosion ripped through the wall, throwing everyone to the floor. Karn Vox himself stepped through the smoke, towering in crimson armor, his massive blade sparking against the metal floor. Around him, Syndicate troops rallied like wolves behind their alpha. Rian got to his feet, meeting the warlord's gaze across the ruined hall. The two forces clashed in a storm of gunfire and steel, while outside the window the battle for the skies raged on. Karn moved through the fight like a living weapon, scattering rebels with sweeps of his blade. Rian charged him, dodging a strike that split the floor where he had stood a second earlier. They circled each other, trading blows, Rian's rifle cracking Karn's armor, while the warlord's sword sliced the air with killing intent. The duel crashed through walls and into the tower's control chamber, scattering consoles and soldiers alike. Sparks rained from the ceiling as stray shots shattered power conduits. Zara and Clank held off Syndicate reinforcements at the door, while rebels pushed in behind them, turning the room into chaos. Karn finally knocked the rifle from Rian's hands, sending it skidding across the floor. He raised his blade for the killing strike, but a blast of energy slammed into him from behind, staggering the warlord forward. Maya stood in the doorway, holding a fallen guard's weapon, eyes glowing faintly blue from whatever experiments the Syndicate had done to her. She fired again, the shot punching through Karn's shoulder armor. The warlord roared, spinning toward her, but Rian tackled him, driving both of them through a console in a shower of sparks. They fought hand to hand, trading brutal blows until Rian finally drove Karn's own blade through the gaps in his armor, pinning him to the floor. The warlord convulsed once, then went still, his helmeted head turning toward Maya before falling back lifeless. Outside the window, rebel ships pushed the Syndicate fleet back, now leaderless and disorganized. Syndicate troops in the Citadel began surrendering or fleeing as word of Karn's death spread. Zara helped Rian to his feet, muttering that he looked like hell. He glanced at Maya, who lowered the weapon slowly, her glowing eyes fading back to normal. She looked at him not like a child anymore, but like someone who had seen too much too fast. The battle for Starforge Prime was over, but Rian knew wars rarely ended just because one man died. There were always others waiting in the dark. The death of Karn Vox should have ended everything. That was how stories like this were supposed to go. The villain falls, the heroes walk away, and the galaxy celebrates. But as Rian stood over the warlord's body, the tower shaking from distant explosions, he realized the Syndicate had planned for failure. Every console in the control chamber lit up with crimson warnings, scrolling in alien language before Clank translated them into 3 simple words: planetary core overload. "They are going to wipe the whole planet," Rian said grimly. Zara swore under her breath, while Maya just stared at the consoles, her expression unreadable. Eli stepped forward calmly, as though the end of the world was just another fact in a long list of unpleasant truths. The Syndicate always destroys evidence, he said quietly. If they cannot win, they erase. Rebels in the room shouted orders into comms, trying to warn their ships, while outside the window the Syndicate fleet fragmented under rebel assault, some ships fleeing, others fighting to the death. None of it would matter if the planet itself went up. We have maybe 30 minutes before the core blows, Zara said, scanning the readings. Maybe less if their failsafes are half as nasty as the rest of this place. Rian looked around the chamber at rebels, Syndicate prisoners, the rescued children huddled near the walls. He had one gunship outside, maybe enough room for the kids and a handful of soldiers, but not everyone. The Syndicate had made sure any choice here would be ugly. Maya touched his arm, drawing his attention. Her eyes glowed faintly again, the same unnatural light he had seen when she shot Karn Vox. "I can hear something," she whispered. "The systems. The machines. They are speaking to me." Rian frowned, glancing at Eli, who nodded like this was completely expected. "The trials woke abilities in some of us," Eli explained. "She might be able to shut the overload down. Or she might not survive trying." The words hit like a punch. Rian had fought wars, lost friends, buried family, but now his niece stood in front of him, calm and strange, and possibly the only thing standing between life and planetary annihilation. "No," he said instantly. "We find another way." "There is no other way," Eli replied with that same eerie calm. "The Syndicate designed the system to be impenetrable to normal access. Only someone changed by the trials can reach the core commands directly." Zara cursed again, slamming a fist against the console. 10 minutes, maybe 15, before the chain reaction hits critical. Maya stepped past Rian, placing her hands on the primary console. Lights across the chamber flared brighter, as if the whole citadel was reacting to her presence. She closed her eyes, brow furrowing in concentration. "The systems are angry," she whispered. "They do not want to stop." Rian wanted to pull her back, but Eli stopped him with a hand on his arm. "If you break her focus, it will kill us all," the boy said simply. Alarms grew louder, shaking the walls as power conduits overloaded across the fortress. Outside, the storm raged harder, lightning hammering the citadel towers, while rebel ships evacuated civilians and wounded under constant Syndicate fire. The whole world felt like it was tearing itself apart piece by piece. Rian helped organize the evacuation, carrying children to the landing platforms, while rebels formed perimeter lines against the remaining Syndicate fanatics, still fighting despite their leader's death. Zara coordinated shuttle runs, screaming into comms at pilots who moved too slowly for her liking. Clank stayed behind in the control chamber, linking itself into the fortress systems to help Maya. Its metal frame crackled with electricity as it forced additional power toward her connection, burning itself out in the process. For once the AI made no sarcastic comments, only a single statement before its voice faded completely, probability of success rising from 12% to 40%. "Do not waste it." Minutes crawled by like hours until finally the lights across the citadel shifted from crimson to pale blue. The alarms fell silent one by one, leaving only the howl of the storm outside. Maya opened her eyes, swaying on her feet before Rian caught her. "It is done," she said softly. "The core is stable." But the cost was clear. Clank's smoking frame lay slumped against the main console, completely inert. Rian felt a strange pang for the irritating machine before pulling Maya toward the waiting shuttle. They left Starforge Prime as the rebels claimed the ruins of the Citadel, raising their banners where Syndicate symbols had flown for decades. The remaining Syndicate ships fled into deep space, leaving the system to rebel control. On board the Starblade, the rescued children huddled together, silent and pale. Some, like Eli, watched everything with eyes far too old for their bodies. Others clung to one another, trembling as the adrenaline faded. Zara dropped into the pilot's seat, muttering that she was officially retiring after this job, preferably somewhere with no storms, no warlords, and no exploding planet. Rian almost smiled, but his gaze stayed on Maya, sitting quietly near the viewport. She met his eyes, finally speaking in a low voice. I can still hear them. The machines. The syndicate left more out there. They are not finished. Rian sat beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Then we will be ready next time. The Starblade jumped to faster than light speed, leaving Starforge Prime behind as a grave and a warning. For now the children were safe, the syndicate shattered, and the war temporarily ended. But Rian knew wars like this never truly stop. They waited, they adapted, and they always came back meaner than before. Maya leaned against him, silent, her eyes reflecting the passing stars with that faint, unnatural glow. Rian wondered what exactly the trials had turned her into, and whether the galaxy was ready for it. When Zara announced they had set course for the nearest rebel medical station, Rian finally allowed himself to exhale, leaning back in his seat. The cost had been high, too high maybe, but for the first time since the day the sky fell he believed they had a chance to rebuild something out of the wreckage. For now that would have to be enough.